Good evening and welcome everyone to the BFI African Odysseys event. My name is Adam Elliot-Cooper and tonight I'll be joined by George Amponsah and Dionne Walker to talk about their film, The Hard Stop. So I first saw this film a few years ago and I thought it was a really interesting and quite different take on the lives of the people who had been affected by the killing of Mark Duggan and the subsequent civil unrest. As many people watching this, I'm sure, are already aware, Mark Duggan was killed by the police on the 4th of August 2011. And the civil unrest which ensued from the police inaction to engage with his family effectively led to massive political upheavals all over the country. And I think what's really powerful about this film, and one of the things that really resonates, I think, with a lot of the people who viewed it, was the way in which this wider political context was told through the almost ordinary and mundane lives through the people who were affected by the unrest and Mark's death. So maybe I want to begin a little bit by starting at the beginning, which seems to make sense. George and Dionne, what first drew your attention to following this particular story? Why was it something you wanted to make a film about?
Well, for me, I'd made a couple of long-form documentaries prior to, what year was it? 2012. And they had both been documentaries I'd put a lot of work into. I was quite proud of them, of the results. And one was looking at a story in emanating from Congo, Central African Republic, and Democratic Republic of Congo, and the other story was emanating from Ghana, which is the country of my parents. And by 2011, I really had this feeling that I wanted to make a film about a British subject matter, something really closer to home, something that could speak to what I know and to my identity as a Black British person. So I was looking for a story anyway, and I wanted it to be something meaty. I wanted it to be something that I could get my teeth into. And it was just by chance. I think it might have been actually Dionne's older sister. I think there was a party, or one of Dionne's relatives anyway, there was a party in North London. And at that party in 2012, I met someone who said that she was a community leader, let's say, quote unquote, in Tottenham. And we got talking, and the subject turned to the previous year's riots of 2011. And I'd already told her that I was a filmmaker. And she said, well, perhaps you'd be interested in making a film about some young men that I know who were at the epicenter of last year's disturbances, close friends of Mark Duggan. And I said, absolutely, I'd be very interested in meeting those people. And so she set up a meeting between myself and Marcus and Curtis in 2012. I met them. At the time that I met Marcus and Curtis, Marcus was on house arrest, I guess would be the one way of describing it. He had one of those electronic tags, bracelets around his ankle, and he was under some sort of curfew conditions. And I met him, and we got talking, and they said they were interested in making a film. I said I was interested in making a film. We said, all right, let's give it a try. And then we got started from there.
And how did your relationship develop with your two protagonists? I guess you were following them around a lot on their kind of mundane lives and learning about their kind of day-to-day realities, but also trying to do something deeper, right? Trying to tell a deeper, wider story.
Well. Absolutely. I think it's probably important to say that the relationship developed quite just in terms of trust, in terms of getting access and getting them to trust me, and trying to dispel the idea from their minds that I might be an undercover police officer of some sort. And so for the first 6 months, I think it was very much a kind of getting to know you kind of process, and they come from a community who have every reason, in my opinion, to be distrustful of the media. I'm talking about people, Broadwater Farm, and they weren't happy with the media portrayal of what had happened to their friend Mark Duggan. And as far as they were concerned, I represented the media, and I was very keen to convey to them from the outset that actually I'm not the media, I'm not a journalist, I'm not here to get a quick story and then disappear. I make long form observational documentary films. I'm very passionate about documentaries. This is what I've come from. I've made these previous films about these subject matters, which took, years to make. And I intend to do the same with you, if you'll allow me. And I think after when they realize that, okay, well, this guy does seem to know the front from the back end of a video camera. He seems to know what he's doing. And the fact that I was still around 6 months later, a year later, I think that's how the trust started to build up.
But of course, you weren't just engaging with your two protagonists and following them around on their daily lives and how their lives have been affected by the death of Mark and the unrest. You also were doing a lot of investigations of the courts and the police. And I know you attended the inquiry into the killing of Mark Duggan. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of wider research that you did around the film as well?
Let me think. I mean, I certainly went to the inquest on quite a few occasions. It's an interesting question, Adam, because research. I'm doing a documentary at the moment about the British Black Power movement in the 1960s and 70s. It's very much archive based, and it's a historical story. And so there's been a lot of research into that. Well, when we're talking about the hard stop, bear in mind, we started making the film in 2012. And, the riots happened and Mark Duggan's killing happened in 2011. So it's just, when you say research, I find that quite an interesting question, because the research was all around us kind of thing. It was still in the news somewhat. And, I think Dionne and I had done our research the previous year in some ways, where we understood, I remember we were in Fulham and we were watching news reports of the riots on the news, on our television. And it got to a point, and they'd spread, because as I'm sure you remember, it started in Tottenham, it emanated from Tottenham, and then it spread to Hackney, and then it just started spreading all over London. Before you knew it, it was in Birmingham and Liverpool and these sort of places. But it got to Clapham, I believe, and Battersea, and we were watching the news in Fulham. I don't know what day it was a Wednesday night or whatever. And we just thought, why are we watching this on the news? And we jumped in the car and just drove across Wandsworth Bridge and to go and see it ourselves. And I think the first policeman we got to, we said, oh, we're press. And I think Dionne might have had a stills camera around, in a hand. And we said, we're press. And he said, oh, no problem. And he kind of, pulled up the yellow paper, whatever it was, and said, no, you can go over there. And there's some burning buildings, just, a few streets in that direction. And I just thought, this is just really unusual for the police to be sort of standing off and to be taking this sort of laissez-faire approach. It was just really seemed very, very unprecedented at the time. And, we knew something a bit extraordinary had happened. So yeah, I mean, in terms of research, I think certainly, we were keen to look really back into the sort of the historical, dynamic, I guess, between that community from Broadwater Farm and the police. And that's kind of took us back to 1985. But I think a lot of the research came from speaking with people, obviously Marcus and Curtis, protagonists of the film. But you know, other people like Stafford Scott, who makes an appearance in the film. You know, it's very important to get his perspective as someone who could talk about 1985 from the point of view of someone who was there, you know, as a young adult. Marcus and Curtis, of course, were, you know, pretty much just barely out of nappies at that point in their lives.
No, definitely. So I think it was really interesting that you were able to bring that history. I think really important that you were able to bring that history to an audience who, yeah, as you say, may well have been in nappies when it took place and may not have a living memory as their parents' generation might, and to maybe perhaps better contextualize what took place in 2011 and the months and years which followed. Dionne, if I can bring you in a little bit, could you maybe talk about any problems that you might have encountered whilst doing this filming?
Well, any problems, you know, as I'm sure everyone knows, making films, documentaries, there are always obstacles. And making a project like this, there definitely were obstacles. But before, I wanted to go back to question 1 to George, where he spoke about how he met, you know, how he came upon access essentially. So we were, so from my point of view, we were looking for a project to do around the riots, around what happened, because, you know, it was around us, and we just thought, well, why is this the case? This is 2011. And so come 2012, when we were at a dinner party, my brother's birthday dinner, and the conversation got on to the fact that one of the guests were actually friends or had access. I think the idea is George kind of jumped to it, and the access developed there. But yeah, I just wanted to say there was always an interest in how we, I guess, investigate why the riots happened and why it spread in such a manner, having witnessed it ourselves. And indeed, and George will obviously confirm this, we were filming with 2 other individuals. They're kind of musicians at the time, a project that we call grinding or something, which means, I guess, hustling in the music world, and actually have footage of them talking about what transpired. You know, the riots took place whilst we were involved in that, in interviewing them for a potential project. And so there was always that context. So in essence, we, you know, certainly myself, having curated a series on protests, which did look at the Tottenham riots and did look at what happened in Birmingham in 2011 for the British Museum, decided that we should try and look at what's happening today. So that just in terms of coming into the project. In terms of the research, I think from quite earlier on, we decided to look at the historical next to to what was happening. And so this area of Tottenham was always going to be a character in the documentary. So absolutely, it was about Mark Duggan. Absolutely, it was about the 2 leading characters and their story, but it was also about Tottenham again, so to speak. And, you know, what it is about this place that says that, you know, where this has gone on, you know, like, okay, back in 1985 and again today, in terms of the history. And of course, you see that in the hard stop, in the film itself, you see that the historical narrative plays out. I mean, again, in terms of research, we looked at discussions and essays around, you know, like Gilroy's essay that actually discussed how the contemporary, how the 2011 riots, so, well, not riots, protests, the peaceful protests that started in Tottenham did involve more women, actually. And, you know, and he made a quite explicit points about that, and how that was indifferent to the previous riots. And I'm just touching on that as an example of how, you know, when we went about developing the story and shaping the narrative, it was a consideration of, you know, we ensure that we look at the interaction between the women involved, not least the mothers, you know, the mothers of Marcus, mother of Curtis, and of course Mark Duggan's mother. You know, we ensured that we filmed footage, and, you know, made sure we interviewed them and kept them in the picture. So obstacles, in terms of obstacles. So, and as George says, we were also doing first-hand research. So what you see of the end product is pretty much a tiny amount of the work that we've actually done in this project. We researched a number of we researched Michael Mansfield, for example. Sorry, we interviewed Michael Mansfield in terms of research. We spoke to you, Adam, you know, outside the courts. We interviewed Matthew Ryder. We interviewed David Lamb. We kind of, at different stages, we went about quite purposefully interviewing a number of individuals. We interviewed those members who were arrested after PC Blakelock's killing. You know, we went to a number of community meetings and so on.
Can I just quickly just add something as well in terms of your question about research, Adam? Because it is an interesting question, and you know, I should say it's very much an observational documentary, and also it was somewhat a process of discovery, because I've got to be 100% honest. I really did not really know what I was going to find when, you know, in terms of these two individuals. I thought I had a feeling about something, and I felt that there was something somewhat missing in terms of the media portrayals of Mark Duggan. And what I felt was missing is that element of him, which must have been, you know, it was a family man and, you know, a member of a community, because I thought for that response to have happened, you have to give the whole story, you know, because otherwise there's a little bit of a question mark about mystery. Well, if he was this gun-toting, violent, drug-dealing thug, then there's something missing in terms of the equation of why those disturbances happened. And I kind of thought, basically, well, look, if you can tell something about someone from the company they keep, well, let's make an observational film about two of his childhood friends. Let's see what we discover about who he really was and what he was really like. But when I started with them, I really didn't know. I didn't know what was going to emerge. And for, you know, it might have got to a point where perhaps I may have felt that, you know, this isn't a story I want to tell. These aren't characters that I really can, you know, in any way sort of support or admire, you know, or dear to, or something. It might be that, or it might be a portrayal of guys who are sort of, you know, a little bit sort of off the rails, and, you know, you don't know how you feel about them, and morally speaking, they're somewhat challenged. You know, obviously, I think it's clear from the hard stop that Marcus and Curtis are no angels, and they're very odd. What I loved about them, quite immediately, was just the honesty. It's just the courage to just be and say, look, this is who we are. This is where we come from, you know, and right or wrong, and to say, hey, well, look, you know, and in the end, it was a delight to be able to discover what these two men were about, and to be able to portray in an observational documentary these two people doing what I think is one of the things that human beings find hardest to do, which is to change oneself. And it was really simply, that's it. That's the blueprint for the movie, is to see these guys doing something courageous and somewhat inspiring. And yet, these two people come from the same ilk as this person, who was written off by many sections of our media as, you know, scum, you know, the dregs, an outcast, you know, no place in our society for someone of that sort. That's pretty much it.
And what about you, Dionne? Was there anything that was particularly surprising that you came across during the course of the filming?
I mean, I could go in the direction of discussing getting funding on the project, you know, and how we did that, because obviously we shot a lot, and, you know, we shot and observed and followed for a while before we attracted any backers. And so we can dig into that if you want. There's also the direction of, we try to get the police, for example. I mean, I sent quite a few letters, you know, trying to get a right of reply, so to speak, or, you know, their perspective, like, you know, verbatim, but the case was going on. So, you know, we quickly realized that that wasn't going to happen, as in, you know, so in the end, and certainly this came about in shaping the story in the edit. We, you know, so as we went into edit, we started to shape the story. We discussed how we were going to kind of, you know, give a perspective of the authority. If it's not, you know, let's not say just the police, but that sort of authority position, which is in contrast to the, you know, members of Mark Duggan's family, the community. Yeah. So here we are. We're pretty much observing, you know, Mark Duggan's friends, family, and the community, and staying, you know, and pretty much with them. However, we got to the point where we're like, well, we need to shape this up in a way where we present some of the other side, you could say, and where the police didn't, you know, I guess they just wasn't able to. We went about it by presenting the transcript from the inquest. Obviously, we turn up at the inquest and, you know, and follow what's going on there, and we did it via the kind of, you know, the what was happening in the inquest, essentially, and with what was coming through the media. So as the media reported what was going on in the inquest, we would filter that and present that in the documentary. So, and of course, the media naturally, you know, would speak to the police position and the family's position, you know, both sides. So you see that in the documentary. And so absolutely there were obstacles, and that was one of them. And then in the end, we, and it was through the same family same community leader, we met an ex-police who's kind of local to Tottenham, and you know, he's doing his youth work. We decided to, you know, have him in the documentary just to reflect something of that.
So obviously the film was made in the aftermath of the largest case of civil unrest in a generation. And now we're relaunching the film in the aftermath of the largest anti-racist protests in a generation. Do you think the film will be seen differently in the context of I guess in the shadow of the massive Black Lives Matter mobilizations we've seen in the summer of 2020?
I don't know. I was a bit. I don't know if how to answer that. I hope so. Yeah, I hope so, because you know, for me, that's what you hope, that you make a film in, you know, whenever it's made. In our case, 2015, and it's nice to think that the film will be seen differently in 2020, because you know, people are different in 2020 to how they are in 2015. You know, that's part of the process of life. Definitely, like, you know, and you just hope that the film has a shelf life. I'd like to think the film be seen differently in 2030. You know, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I hope so. I don't know.
What about you, Dionne?
I think people are angry. I mean, look, we were all shocked when the riots, you know, how violent the riots got. I mean, certainly this is why George and I got involved in this project. I think that was kind of the immediate reaction was, wow, you know, younger generation, this is just kind of unbelievable, and they really seem to be going, and different individuals as well, people from different backgrounds. And so fast forward 2020, I would say there seemed to be less violence with the Black Lives Matter movement. It's far more structured. I think what it is that they're seeking is far more structured. You know, the discussions, for example, around defunding, even though, you know, it says defunding, I mean, it actually translates as refunding, and looking at where the funding goes, and looking at how and perhaps ensuring that there's more community community and youth organizations implemented on the ground. I mean, obviously, that's not all. It's not all about that. But the key thing I'm saying is, I think 2020, there's definitely a good sense of what the ask is, what it is that the Black Lives Matter movement is saying. I think we're more familiar with it. I mean, I don't think it existed. You know, the kind of movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, didn't exist in 2011, as far as I know. So there's, you know, it was just a kind of outpouring of anger and distrust, and I think so. It represented something, but you know, people asked questions, and reports happen, and surveys, and so I think on the back of that, now we have, you know, far more structured understandings and of what individuals want.
And it's quite interesting, the link between what happens in this country in terms of policing and Black communities and what happens in the United States. Because like Dionne says, in 2011, there was no notion of Black Lives Matter movement. But by 2015, 2016, there really was. But of course, you know, 2015, even earlier than that, I think 2014 perhaps, you know, and these issues were starting to emerge in the United States And that movement was starting to emerge in the United States around about the time we're trying to get this film made here in Britain called The Hard Stop. And, you know, we were having a tough time. We were having a tough time getting any interest in our film, you know, to begin with for the first few years. And guess where the first support really came from? It came from America. It came from Sundance, because they were fascinated by this notion that we have similar, almost identical issues over here to what they have over there. We don't have the same gun culture, that's true, but the issues are the same. And that's why Sundance took a very keen interest in The Hard Stop and gave us our first bit of funding.
And just to, you know, just to square George's point about backing, is we were backed, you could say more or less simultaneously. Sundance backed us, Bertha came on, and BFI, and BFI, you know, really kind of stood with us, and in terms of releasing the film and so on. So, you know, as I was saying, we could go in different directions, but in terms of funding, we developed footage, and once we pitched, you know, it was a domino effect, and it's so the three main funders in the end were Sundance, Bertha, and Doc Society now, but and BFI.
Yeah, and BritDoc, and Doc House.
Well, Dionne, George, I want to thank you so much for talking to me about your film Hard Stop, and I hope everyone enjoys it.
All right, thank you.
And just to close, I want to remind everyone that into October, African Odysseys are presenting a series of film titles, Injustice, exploring the ideas we've talked about tonight. If you've enjoyed this event, please do check out the programme and consider coming along to some of the screenings. And if you're not able to make it in person and are in a position to do so, please do consider donating to the BFI. They're a charity and their venues have been closed throughout lockdown, so all contributions are greatly appreciated.